In a small fishing village in the heart of Norway called Åndalsnes, where snow-capped mountains stood like silent guardians, life was hard but predictable. Residents depended on frozen lakes and fjords for survival, defying harsh winters to fish and hunt. Among them, Klaus Mikkelsen, a young fisherman in his early 20s, was struggling to maintain his family's tradition after his father's tragic death in an ice accident 2 years earlier. Klaus had a determination that earned him respect, but also an insatiable curiosity, something that many considered dangerous in a village full of superstitions. The young man lived with his grandmother, Sigrid, a 70-year-old woman whose view of the world was shaped by the ancient legends of the region. She constantly warned him about the dangers of the frozen lakes, and in particular about the ice mermaid, an entity that, according to local stories, attracted men with her mesmerizing beauty and melancholy song, leading them to certain death under the influence of ice. Before we continue with this intriguing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us bring more content like this to you. Now let's get back to the story. If you hear singing coming from the lake, Klaus, turn your back and run home, said Sigrid with a deep voice and fixed eyes. These creatures have no mercy. They feed on our souls. Despite the warnings, Klaus did not believe such stories. To him, they were just old wives' tales. If there's anything in the lake, he said to his friends, it's the ice cracking in the cold, not monsters. One winter morning, with the timid sun painting the sky a pale blue, Klaus decided to explore a remote lake, Sorgensvann, where few dared to go. Fishing there was abundant, but the place was feared because of the legend of the mermaid. He needed a good profit to repair his family's old boat, an inheritance left by his father. With his fishing rod and a backpack full of supplies, Klaus set off alone, ignoring Sigrid's protests. As Klaus walked across the ice of Lake Sorgensvann, the landscape around him looked like something out of a painting. The white of the ice mixed with the grey tones of the distant mountains, and the silence was absolute, interrupted only by the occasional crunch of ice beneath his feet. The feeling of isolation was almost overwhelming, but Klaus confidently moved on. After setting up his tent and cutting a hole in the ice, the fisherman sat down and began to work. He felt triumphant as he caught one fish after another, thinking how the village would mock his unfounded fears. But as night fell and the icy wind blew harder, something changed. Klaus began to feel a slight shiver, but not from the cold. A strange melody, low and subtle, began to echo through the ice. Initially, he thought it was the wind crossing the valleys, but the sound was very human. A female voice seemed to sing a melody that made him feel uneasy, but inexplicably attracted. Gradually, the water in the fishing hole began to ripple, as if something large was moving beneath the ice. Intrigued and slightly scared, Klaus took a flashlight and shone it into the opening. He saw only liquid darkness, but the sound seemed closer, almost intimate. Suddenly, something shiny appeared in the water. It was a silver reflection, but not that of a fish. Before he could react, a slender, translucent figure briefly emerged, disappearing shortly thereafter. Klaus felt his heart race. The singing stopped. The silence that followed was even more oppressive than the melody. Back in the village, Klaus recounted the experience to his friends in the only local pub, Bjorn's Haven. Most laughed, attributing the event to tiredness and the cold. Only one man, Eric, an older reclusive fisherman, didn't laugh. "You saw her," Eric said, his tone dark. "I knew she would come back. After 20 years. He stared at Klaus for a long moment but said nothing more. Klaus tried to get more information, but the man just got up and left. The seed of doubt had been planted. Who was that figure in the water? Was it a mermaid or just your imagination playing tricks? Over the next few days, Klaus couldn't get the vision of the figure and the corner out of his mind. Against the advice of his grandmother and friends, he decided to return to Lake Sorgensvann. This time, I was determined to understand what I had actually seen. After all, if this was the legendary ice siren, he couldn't ignore it. But there was something more. Klaus felt inexplicably attracted to the voice he had heard, as if something or someone was calling him. On the horizon, the sky was darkening again. The lake, covered in shining ice, seemed to wait for him in silence. Klaus returned to Lake Sonsvan late in the afternoon, ignoring the suspicious looks of the villagers. His grandmother, Sigrid, tried to stop him with words filled with concern. "If you go back there, Klaus, don't expect me to come get you from the bottom of the lake," she said with a stern tone. "The ice mermaid is not a story for children. It's a curse." "Grandmother," Klaus replied, adjusting the weight of the backpack on his shoulders. "If there is something in this lake, I need to know. I won't run away from legends." When we arrived, the lake looked different than it did that morning. The ice reflected the cloudy sky, but the light was less inviting, almost opaque. The wind was blowing with increasing force, bringing a howl that made the hairs on the back of Klaus's neck stand up. He set up his equipment, and before opening the hole in the ice, he felt that chill again. With difficulty, he began to cut through the ice, which seemed thicker than before, as if the lake was trying to impede his progress. Finally, when a hole was formed, the water appeared to be agitated. The surface rippled slightly, as if something was moving below. Klaus adjusted his hat and cast the line into the water. He wasn't just there to fish, but to confront the unknown. The silence around him was so intense that his every breath seemed to echo across the vast emptiness of the lake. That's when it happened. The melody returned, this time stronger, clearer. The female voice seemed to sing words in an ancient language that Klaus couldn't understand, but that moved him in a visceral way. It was a song that left him both mesmerized and unsettled, as if something was unearthing memories he didn't know he possessed. Suddenly, the surface of the hole in the water shone. Something slowly emerged, a translucent female figure with long white hair that flowed like streams of ice. His eyes were a bright blue, so intense that they seemed to penetrate Klaus's soul. She was not what he imagined a mermaid to be. It didn't have the conventional beauty of the stories, but something ethereal and hauntingly enchanting. "You heard me?" said the voice, soft as a whisper, but echoing like thunder. There was no movement of his lips. The speech came from inside Klaus' mind. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice wavering but his curiosity keeping him still. "I am part ice, part water," she replied, tilting her head to the side as if studying Klaus with interest. "You came to me, and now we are linked." Before Klaus could respond, the figure quickly sank into the water, leaving only silence and the feeling that something terrible had been awakened. Back at the village, Klaus was pale and distant. He felt unable to process what had happened. When he arrived at the pub, he found Eric, who seemed to be waiting for him. "You saw it, didn't you?" Eric asked bluntly. "Yes," Klaus replied, his voice firm but with a hint of disbelief. "Who or what is she?" Eric sighed deeply. "It's the ice mermaid. My brother disappeared 20 years ago, shortly after hearing her singing. He wasn't the only one. She appears when the lakes are ready to claim another life." "This is crazy!" Klaus exclaimed, although he knew that what he had seen had no logical explanation. "Maybe it is," Eric replied, "but you opened the portal, and now she won't stop." That night, upon returning home, Klaus felt the air colder than usual. As he passed through the kitchen, he noticed that the window was ajar. The wind blew inward, bringing with it small flakes of snow, which settled in strange patterns on the ground. Suddenly, he heard the sound of dripping water, something impossible in a frozen environment. Klaus followed the sound to the living room, where he saw a puddle of water form beneath his feet. When he looked in the mirror, he saw her. The ice mermaid was reflected behind him, even though no one was physically there. "Klaus," she said in a voice that was both sweet and terrifying, "you belong on the ice now." Before he could react, the image disappeared, but the cold remained. He ran to Sigrid's room, telling her what had happened, but the grandmother just shook her head sadly. "I warned you, Klaus," she said. "You woke her up. Now she wants you." Convinced that the mermaid was more real than he ever imagined, Klaus decided to investigate the village's ancient legends. He spent the night going through his grandmother's diaries and records, searching for any mention of the creature. Among the yellowed and worn pages, he found something disturbing. One entry mentioned a story from centuries ago, when a young girl named Era was sacrificed to the ice by her own village to appease the fury of a storm that was devastating the region. Her spirit, rejected by heaven and earth, would have merged with the icy waters, becoming the Ice Mermaid. "The sacrifice was the beginning," muttered Klaus, interpreting the text. "She's not killing for fun. Are you looking for something? But what?" Before he could answer his own question, he heard the singing again, this time closer, more intense. Klaus woke up in the middle of the night to a deafening noise. It was as if the ice on Lake Songsvan was crunching inside his house. When he opened his eyes, he saw that his window was completely covered in ice, but on the inside. He rubbed his eyes, trying to understand what was happening. The singing returned, stronger than ever, filling the air with a haunting, hypnotic melody. Sigrid burst into the room, her face pale with terror. "Klaus, you need to leave the village now," she said, grabbing his arm with unexpected strength for her age. "She won't stop until she takes you, and if it takes you, it won't stop there. Other lives will be in danger. If I run away, won't she chase other people?" Klaus replied, trying to reason. "She doesn't want them all. She wants me." Sigrid stopped, swallowing hard. "Whatever she wants, you can't just give in." Klaus decided to return to Lake Songsvan. This time, I wasn't just curious. He was determined to confront the mermaid and understand what she wanted. Ignoring his grandmother's pleas and the worried looks of the villagers, he walked to the lake under a sky full of heavy clouds, as if nature itself was conspiring against him. Upon arrival, Klaus noticed that the ice around the lake was different. It seemed more translucent, like thin glass, and beneath it were shadows that moved, too fast to be fish. He threw a flashlight into the water, and then it happened. Her face appeared on the surface, staring directly at him. "Why are you chasing me?" Klaus shouted, his voice echoing through the surrounding void. "Because you listened to me," replied the mermaid, the voice reverberating in his mind. "And now you need to pay for what was done to me." Suddenly, the ice cracked beneath his feet. Klaus stepped back in time to avoid falling, but part of his backpack was swallowed by the hole. The chanting grew louder, and then he saw other figures emerged from beneath the ice, deformed human shadows that seemed trapped in the depths of the lake. As Klaus struggled to maintain control over his sanity, Eric appeared carrying a torch and an axe. "Come home, Klaus!" shouted the old fisherman, his voice firm. "You can't face her alone." "So you know what's going on, Eric?" Klaus replied, exasperated. "You always knew." Eric hesitated before finally confessing. "My brother. He was taken by her because, like you, he heard the singing. But he wasn't the first. For generations, men like us have been drawn to this curse. I tried to warn you, but you were just as stubborn as he was." "Why does she do that?" Klaus asked, looking at the lake, where the ice now seemed to pulse, like a heart. "She wants redemption," Eric said. "Or revenge. It depends on how you look at it." Eric led Klaus back to the village, where he showed him an old diary, passed down from generation to generation among local fishermen. In the diary, there was a ritual described in detail, a sacrifice necessary to appease the mermaid. "One of us needs to go to the center of the lake, where she was sacrificed, and offer her something she wants," Eric explained. "It's usually something of personal value, something that represents our bond with the land and water." "Something of personal value," Klaus repeated. "This is crazy. And you think she'll stop without it?" Eric retorted, his expression dark. "If we don't do this, it will continue to haunt us." Desperate to save the village and free himself from the mermaid's pursuit, Klaus decided he would go to the lake and follow the ritual. He prepared an amulet left by his father, something he never had the courage to abandon. The object, a small carved wooden figure, was the only physical tie he had to the memory of the man who taught him all about ice and fishing. With Eric and Sigrid watching from a distance, Klaus walked across the ice of Sognsvann to the center of the lake, where the ice appeared thinner and more transparent. He placed the amulet on the ice and began reciting the words of the ritual as the mermaid's melody filled the air around him. The water began to boil beneath him, and the mermaid's figure emerged once more, now fully visible. Her translucent hands reached towards the amulet, but before she could reach it, she looked at Klaus. "That's not enough," she said, her voice cutting through the air like sharp ice. "I don't want an object, I want you." The ground began to crack again, and Klaus realized that the sacrifice required was not an item, but his own life. He felt the ice give way beneath his feet, but before he could sink, Eric ran towards him, shouting for him to come back. As Klaus tried to escape, something unexpected happened. The mermaid hesitated. Her bright blue eyes lost focus, and for a moment, she looked human. Klaus felt a surge of inexplicable compassion. "Why were you sacrificed?" he asked, his voice desperate. "Because they were afraid," replied the mermaid. "But not from me. They feared what they could not control." Klaus saw the amulet begin to sink into the ice, and with it, the figure of the mermaid. She watched him one last time before disappearing into the depths. The singing stopped, and the lake fell silent. But something was wrong. Klaus felt a tug on his mind, as if something had become trapped inside him. The sacrifice was complete, but what had he really lost? After the ceremony at Lake Sognsvann, the ice seemed to have returned to its natural state. The wind ceased, and the siren song turned into absolute silence. Eric and Sigrid ran to Klaus, who remained kneeling on the cracked ice, panting. His body was shaking, but not from the cold. Something had changed inside him. "Klaus, are you well?" shouted Sigrid, holding his shoulders and checking for injuries. "Sheeb is gone," he replied, his voice hoarse, as if he had lost part of himself. "But something is still here." Klaus looked at his hands, which now looked pale, almost translucent, as if some of the ice had transferred to his skin. Eric narrowed his eyes, noticing the change. "The sacrifice was not complete. She left something with you." Upon returning to the village, Klaus felt that something was different. The people who had previously looked at him with suspicion now looked at him with fear. There was a coldness in the air around him that seemed unnatural, and his presence made even dogs avoid passing by him. It was as if he had brought a part of the lake with him. While Klaus tried to recover from the event, Sigrid insisted on taking care of him. She kept him at home, boiling hot soups and reciting ancient prayers, but Klaus knew none of that would solve what was happening. That night, he had his first nightmare. In the dream, Klaus was back at the lake, but this time he was the only one there. The ice beneath his feet was so thin that he could clearly see what lay beneath. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of human figures trapped in the water, with expressions of agony etched on their faces. Among them was the mermaid, with the same bright eyes he had seen before. But this time, she didn't sing. She watched him in silence, and then said, "You are mine now." Klaus woke up screaming, sweat running down his face despite the cold of the house. He felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if something was pulling him down. When he looked in the mirror, he saw that his skin was even paler, and his eyes, once brown, now had an ice blue hue. "It's happening," he muttered to himself. "She didn't let me go." Convinced that something deeper was at play, Klaus decided to investigate the ice siren legends further. He started with the old journals that Eric had shown him, but none of the information seemed useful. It was then that Sigrid revealed something she had kept secret for years. "There is an old man in the mountains," she said. "A shaman named Ragnar. He knows the secrets of ice and water. If anyone can help you, it's him." Klaus hesitated, but he knew he needed answers. The next morning he set out for the mountains, braving the cold and snow that threatened his journey. The walk was long and exhausting, and several times he felt that he could not continue. But something inside him pushed him forward, a desire to survive and understand what was happening. When he finally found Ragnar's cabin, the man was every bit as strange as Klaus had imagined. Tall, with a white beard that reached his chest and eyes as dull as snow, Ragnar looked like he belonged in the mountains. He invited him in without saying a word, as if he already knew Klaus was coming. "You saw her," said Ragnar, pouring a bowl of hot soup, "and now it bears her mark." "Mark?" Klaus asked, looking down at his hands. "She left a piece of her essence in you," the shaman explained. "You faced her, but you did not complete the sacrifice. Now you are caught between two worlds, that of the living and hers." Klaus felt the weight of the words. "Is there a way to reverse this?" Ragnar sighed, standing up and taking an old book from a dust-covered shelf. He flipped through the pages slowly before finding what he was looking for. "There is a way, but it won't be easy. You will need to return to the lake and undo the bond she created with you." "How do I do that?" Klaus asked. "You need to find out what she really wants," Ragnar replied. "And when you know, you should offer it to her willingly, but be careful. If you are not honest, she will not only take you, but also those you love." Back in the village, Klaus realized that time was against him. With each passing day, he felt more disconnected from himself, closer to the ice and the waters. His hands were now completely translucent, and his breath produced tiny ice crystals in the air. Sigrid, increasingly worried, tried to convince him to give up the journey. "Klaus, it's not worth it. You can still live the rest of your life here. With us, you don't need to go back. If I don't go, she'll come back," he said firmly. "And when that happens, it won't just be me, it will be with all of us." He began preparing for his final trip to the lake, this time taking with him the knowledge Ragnar had given him. He knew that, to face the siren, he would need to do something he had never done before, give up his resistance and face the real reason why she had chosen him. The night before leaving, Klaus had another dream, but this time it was different. He saw the mermaid again, but she wasn't on the ice. She was in an ancient village, surrounded by people who looked at her with hatred and fear. He watched as they pushed her into the lake, her screams muffled by the ice that quickly consumed her. Klaus woke up with tears in his eyes, feeling her pain as if it were his own. For the first time he understood, she wasn't just a vengeful creature, she was a victim, trapped in a cycle of suffering that she couldn't break. With this new understanding, Klaus prepared for the final journey, knowing that this time the confrontation would be definitive. The morning sun was hidden behind heavy clouds when Klaus arrived at Lake Songsvan for the last time. He felt the weight of his choices, but also a renewed determination. He wore layers of clothing to protect himself from the cold, but he knew that no amount of physical protection would be enough for what he was about to face. When he reached the center of the lake, where the ice seemed thinner and more treacherous, he stopped and took a deep breath. Ragnar's words echoed in his mind. "Find out what she really wants. Be honest, and be ready to offer everything." Klaus knelt on the ice, feeling the cold seep through his clothes and onto his skin. He closed his eyes and, with a firm voice, called out to her, "Mermaid, I'm back. I know you're still here." The silence lasted only a few moments before the familiar chant emerged again. But this time, it wasn't hypnotic or inviting. It was a deep lament, filled with sadness. The water beneath the ice began to bubble, and a fissure formed, spreading toward Klaus. He didn't back down. The mermaid's translucent figure slowly emerged from the water. His appearance was more human this time, though still ethereal and terrifying. His bright blue eyes met Klaus's, and for a moment the two were silent, staring at each other. "You're back," she said, her voice reverberating in Klaus's mind. "But you still don't understand why I called you." "You were sacrificed," Klaus replied, his voice breaking. "Her village unfairly condemned her. I saw it in my dreams. Do you want justice or revenge?" The mermaid tilted her head, intrigued. "Revenge is just the reflection of pain. What I want is the end of loneliness." I want to be remembered. Klaus felt a lump in his throat. He understood that her curse was not just death, but oblivion. For centuries, people feared and avoided her, turning her into a cruel legend. She wasn't just a vengeful creature. She was an echo of a life brutally cut short. I will remember you, Klaus said, and I will make others remember too. The mermaid raised a pale hand and extended it towards Klaus. If this is true, it must prove it. Not with words, but with its essence. If you give me part of your soul, I will know that you speak the truth. If I fail, I will take you with me. Klaus hesitated. He knew the choice could cost him his humanity, but there was no other option. He reached out his trembling hand and took hers. The contact was like diving into freezing water. His entire body shook, and he felt a part of himself being ripped away, as if memories and emotions were being sucked out of it. As this happened, the mermaid's appearance began to change. His features became more human. His white hair took on shades of gold, and his blue eyes shone with something that seemed peace. The melody stopped, and the lake fell into an almost deafening silence. Klaus fell to his knees, exhausted but still alive. The mermaid looked at him, now more human than ever. She placed her hand on Klaus's chest, as if giving something back in return. "You gave me your souvenir," she said, her voice soft, "and I give you your life back." Dunisit. With those words, the mermaid began to disappear, dissolving into particles of light that spread across the lake. The cracks in the ice closed, and the water became calm again. It was as if she had never been there. When Klaus finally managed to get up, he realized that something had changed inside him. His pale skin was back to normal, and the heaviness he felt in his soul was gone. He felt a strange connection to the lake, but now it was different. It wasn't fear or guilt, but gratitude. As I looked up at the sky, the clouds began to dissipate, and a timid sun illuminated the frozen surface of the lake. Klaus knew that something profound had changed, not just for him, but for the entire village. Back at the village, Klaus shared his story with Eric, Sigrid, and the other villagers. For the first time in centuries, the mermaid was depicted not as a monster, but as a victim of a cruel time and a force of nature who just wanted to be remembered. Eric, moved, decided it was time to give voice to the repressed stories. He and Klaus began recording the legends in a new book so that future generations would not forget the truth about the ice mermaid. In the following days, the village began to see Klaus with new eyes. He was no longer the stubborn fisherman who ignored the legends. He was the man who faced the unknown and brought peace. One night, while looking out the window at the lake, Klaus saw something that made him smile. On the frozen surface, a faint reflection of the mermaid briefly appeared. She wasn't singing or trying to attract him. She was just watching, as if saying goodbye. And then she disappeared forever. Days have passed since Klaus's confrontation with the mermaid at Lake Songsvan. The village, which previously lived in the shadow of legends and unspoken fears, began to transform. Ice was no longer seen as an enemy, but as a silent guardian of the stories of generations past. The mermaid's memory, long distorted, gained new life in Klaus's voice and in the stories he decided to preserve. Klaus, although physically recovered, still felt the absence of something in his soul. The sacrifice he had made at the lake left him with an emptiness he didn't know how to fill. Still, there was an unprecedented peace in his heart. He spent hours writing and reflecting, not just on the mermaid, but on what she represented, the consequences of fear, isolation, and forgetfulness. "I'll never forget it," he said aloud, as he looked out at the lake one winter morning, "and I promise no one will ever forget you." His grandmother, Sigrid, saw in him a changed man, more aware of the weight of legends and traditions. She never mentioned the mermaid again, but sometimes, as she sewed by the fire, she hummed old songs of mourning as a silent tribute to those the lake had taken. In the village, Klaus and Eric led an effort to tell the region's stories fairly. They created a small memorial near Lake Sognsvann where people could visit and learn about the mermaid and the sacrifices she represented. Engraved on a stone at the site was a simple inscription: "Remember the ice, but never fear what it holds." Here rests the memory of Era, the ice mermaid, victim of human fear. May her story inspire compassion and courage. The memorial became a symbol of unity for residents, who began to share other stories and legends that they previously kept hidden. Little by little, the village found strength in its own history. Klaus realized that his connection to the lake would never be completely severed. There were nights when he dreamed of the mermaid, but not as a threat, but as an ethereal figure, watching him with a look of gratitude. He came to see the lake as a constant reminder of the importance of facing the unknown with honesty and courage. One afternoon, while walking near the lake, he found a small blue flower growing in a fissure in the ice, a rare phenomenon in that harsh climate. He reached down and touched the flower, feeling an unexpected warmth in his fingertips. "Thank you," he murmured, sure that, in some way, was the siren's response. The small village that once lived in the shadow of superstitions began to attract visitors from other parts of Norway. Historians, tourists, and even curious writers came to hear about the legend of the ice mermaid and visit the memorial at Sognsvann. As a result, the local economy improved, and the village prospered in ways its inhabitants never imagined. Sigrid, despite her advanced age, became a kind of official teller of the village's legends, always surrounded by children and adults who gathered around the fireplace to listen to her stories. Klaus, in turn, became a respected figure in the village, not just for his courage, but for his dedication to preserving the past while guiding the present. Years later, on a calm night, Klaus walked alone to Lake Sognsvann. The ice was so clear he could see shadows dancing beneath the surface. He stopped at the memorial and stood there, silent, remembering everything that had happened. Suddenly, the mermaid's reflection appeared in the water, but this time, she wasn't alone. The human figures that were once trapped in the ice now seemed free, dancing in a serene and graceful movement. And in the center of them was Ira, looking directly at Klaus. She smiled for the first time. The reflection disappeared, but Klaus felt a deep certainty that the curse had finally been broken. The lake was just a lake now, and he, just a man he would never forget. Klaus lived many years after that meeting, devoting his life to preserving stories and teaching the importance of facing old fears with truth and compassion. When he finally departed from this world, he was buried near the memorial, where a new inscription was added. "Here rests Klaus Mikkelsen, the one who heard the ice mermaid and brought light to the shadows. Your courage echoes in every cracking of the lake." Deip. And so, the history of the ice mermaid remained alive, not as a tale of terror, but as a memory that even the deepest of fears can be faced and transformed. Decades after Klaus's sacrifice on Skogsvann Lake, the village of Åndalsnes became a symbol of cultural preservation and reconciliation with the past. The Ice Mermaid Memorial attracts visitors from every corner of Norway, curious to know the story of the man who faced the ice and brought peace to the spirit of a lost legend. In the central square of the village, a school was built, and at its entrance was a statue of Klaus, standing next to a small fish, symbolizing its humble origin and connection to the lake. At school, a young teacher named Ingrid, Eric's granddaughter, taught children not only traditional disciplines, but also the importance of the legends and stories of the village. "Who can tell me who was Era, the ice mermaid?" asked Ingrid during a class. A red-haired girl lifted her hand. "She was sacrificed by the village, but Mr. Klaus helped her to be remembered," he said proudly. Ingrid smiled, pleased. The children were not afraid of the mermaid. Instead, they saw it as a figure of compassion and learning. Sigrid, even after Klaus's death, continued as guardian of the stories of the village until the last years of his life. In one of her many narration nights, just before leaving, She looked at the children gathered around the fireplace and said, "Remember this, there are no legends without truth, and there is no truth that it cannot be transformed by courage and empathy." These words were recorded at the entrance of the memorial, where they are still read by the visitors. The curse-free lake has become a place of reconciliation. In winters, the children in the village skilled on the ice, and the fishermen were no longer afraid to throw their lines into the water. But there were those who swore that on calmer nights it was still possible to hear a light melody echoing through the mountains. Older residents, including Ingrid, believed it was the Mermaid, watching the village and silently thanking them to never let their story be forgotten. Years later, Ingrid, now an elderly lady, walked through the lake on a clear winter night, accompanied by her granddaughter Liv, a 12-year-old girl. The surface of the ice shone in the moonlight, and the silence was absolute. Ingrid stopped and pointed to the lake. "There, under this ice, is a story that changed the village forever," she said. "Do you think she's still there?" Liv asked, curious. Ingrid smiled. "She will always be here in a way, but not to scare us, to remind us of who we are." Liv looked at the lake with fascination. For a moment she saw something, a silhouette dancing under the ice, surrounded by soft lights. He blinked, but the vision disappeared. Still, she felt an inexplicable calm. "She smiled at me, Grandma," said Liv. Ingrid put a kind hand on his granddaughter's shoulder. "So remember her." That same night, the full moon illuminated the memorial in Sognsvann. The wind passed the trees and over the ice, taking it a soft melody, like a distant echo. It was the Ice Mermaid song, but now it wasn't a lament, it was a celebration. And so, the story of Eira, the Ice Mermaid, lived forever in the village of Åndalsnes, an eternal memory that even the deepest shadows can be transformed into light. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support our work. See you in the next video.